Tusi, who is also a project officer at CIPESA, working in Central Africa and Francophone Africa on communications. And she will be joining us shortly. So when she joins, she will be introduced. Ladies and gentlemen, to start us off, I'd like us to turn to Jimmy. Jimmy, could you kindly highlight, as working in the media and as a blogger, what are some of those emerging trends that you have seen across the continent and also from the Southern African region? And just want to remind our audience that the hashtag for the conference, which you can also engage in, is FIFAAfrica20. That is hashtag FIFAAfrica20. Jimmy, so what do you think is emerging across the continent? Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. I think there are a number of issues that have emerged over the last 10, 12 months or so, but specifically the period where the pandemic has been hitting heavily. But I think some of the key issues that we have noted basically is the government really moving into to limit the civics space. In most cases, in most countries, government has been the only source of information, for example, about COVID-19. But also, say, for example, in countries like Tanzania specifically, where they have criminalized basically the reporting or giving statistics about COVID-19 by anyone, literally, apart from the government itself. So what has happened by and large, basically, is that there have been a lot of new regulations regulations, say, for example, that could have taken maybe a year or two deliberations before they pass. Some of these regulations, basically, they have been passing maybe sometimes within hours, within days. But also we've seen, what we've noticed, I think this is very important also, that some of the laws and regulations that have been not new regulations, are regulations that have always been there, but in most cases perhaps not been used, but they've been revoked because of COVID-19. By and large, I think there's been a lot of, the space has been closed in which people can access information, in which people can basically express themselves. Most of the governments, perhaps maybe, I don't know why, maybe afraid of our citizens, but they've almost criminalized any discussion contrary to the government view. So for example, if somebody thinks some of the reporting or numbers or figures about COVID-19 are not real, you cannot argue against government lest you get in trouble for denying COVID-19 being a pandemic, one or the other. I think one of the big fears is that what happens post COVID-19, because whether you like it or not, we have to go through this pandemic. Some of us will survive, maybe some of us will not be there, but we have a world after the pandemic. So the fear is, are we going to have these laws and regulations reversed back? What's going to happen? So I think for human rights defenders, for campaigners, we really need to think about this. It's not going to end with the COVID-19, but what happens thereafter? I think this is the world with which we are facing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimmy, for that introduction and highlighting the issues. You have mentioned criminalization of, speech and governments attempting to use or using actually laws to, stop people from talking. I'd like to turn to Morisola Alaba from Nigeria. You're a lawyer, and what is your, perspective in terms of how governments are using laws across the continent, or have used laws during this COVID-19 period?
Hello? Hello, Victor.
Yes.
Sorry, I lost you there on the question. I had poor connection.
Wanted to hear from you on in terms of West Africa. What are some of the emerging issues, and how do you think governments have used laws during this period?
Oh, okay.
Right.
Thank you very much. Some of the issues we've had in West Africa, and particularly Nigeria, has been that governments have actually been gagging speeches. There have been issues with journalists. At the beginning of the pandemic, for instance, journalists were declared as essential personnel to the pandemic and they were allowed to work. But we have had issues where journalists could not even go to work. They couldn't get to their offices just to do their jobs because they had issues with the policemen and other agencies and other law enforcement agencies. During the pandemic, we've had issues where there have been high number of arrests of journalists, intimidation, harassment, detention. We've also had we've had cases where even governors threaten journalists, like to the point of threatening them that they lose their lives or something because they are working or they said something wrong, and everything has actually just been on the increase. All the violations has been on the increase. We've seen people being taken to court for their speeches. We've seen people being arrested by the state security services for their speeches and all. And I think the best thing that can happen is for these victims, for instance, to take it to court. Let's litigate is staying in court. But even in the course of the pandemic, the court also has not been sitting except for emergency cases. And what they can define as emergency cases in this instance can be very, very subjective because nobody was actually prepared for the pandemic and nobody expected what we actually got. So except there's a dire need, you can invoke the power of the court to sit and everything. So that also slows down litigation processes, but actually litigation is still going on, and we hope that victims of this harassment, intimidation can get justice as needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morisola. It's a very interesting situation in Nigeria. And, to switch and head back south, I'd like to recognize Simone. Simone, welcome to the discussion. Please wave.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. I had a little issue connecting, but finally I got in. So thank you. I'm really sorry for the...
No problem. You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to turn to Melissa. Melissa, you work in South Africa, and South Africa had quite a high number of COVID cases, and the government, did make quite a number of interventions. From your work in South Africa, what are some of the issues that have emerged in your country?
Can you hear me now? Okay. I guess I can speak from a civic tech point of view to just see what the civic tech and the government have been doing, especially during this COVID time. The South African government has actually been quite proactive in encouraging usage of civic tech during this time, which is quite impressive. Because when it comes to civic tech, it's not, the uptake is quite low. What happens is someone creates an app or a platform to help citizens for public participation, citizen engagement, digital rights, journalism, health services, for whatever purpose. But what happens is there's a lack of awareness about the platform, or there's data issues or data costs. So citizens don't end up taking up or using the platform. So it just ends up sitting there or going dormant. So during, since the pandemic began in February, March here, the government has actually quite encouraged citizens to use some of the platforms. For example, one that's called GovChat, for access to information, for pre-screening, for a lot of access to information that's necessary during this time. And recently, I think they've actually been encouraging citizens to use this contact tracing platform, which they've developed, although that also raises other issues such as privacy and data issues, and who is having access to all this data and who's controlling it. And it's one of those things. And it also raises another issue of what about the rural areas where the people don't have perhaps fancy phones that can have contact tracing apps on them. So while we're trying to progress with new technologies, we also actually have to think about the people that we may be perhaps leaving behind, perhaps not because we are intentionally leaving them behind, but because we actually have to intentionally think about everyone else that we should be taking along when we're developing as a country. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, just to engage you a bit on that contact tracing. Also, what have you seen? What are the issues with the contact tracing applications that have been deployed, at least in South Africa, and what you're seeing in the continent?
So far, I can't say I've seen many issues, as it's been recently been encouraged for usage by the president. I think early September, that's when they encourage people to use it. So I haven't seen much of issues, but the main issues that's been raised is who are we giving our data to, and who's controlling it, and what happens to this data? Is it just going to be used to trace for COVID and it ends there? So it's all these issues of people feeling like they're being surveilled, and they can know where my location is, they know where I was last week. It's issues that are important to the person, because we don't always want the government to know where exactly we are, especially in this kind of climate. For example, what if you're accused of something, let's say posting fake news, which is also a new law that the government passed earlier this year. I think a man has been arrested back in April for posting fake news. So for example, if you do something like that, they can easily find you and arrest you. So it's these concerning issues that arise from the new technology that we're developing as Africans, or as people in general. I think the contact tracing issue is all over the world. Who are we giving our data to, and who's controlling it? And what does the government end up doing with the data they're getting access to?
Very interesting. Thank you very much for those elucidating comments. We'll come back to it shortly. I'd like to turn to Simone. Simone, you work in Cameroon, and you've looked at some of the issues in Western North Africa. From your perspective, what are some of these emerging issues that we need to start paying attention
to? Thank you, Victor. We've got very few but intensive issues right here in Cameroon, as well as in Chad. Those are countries I've been lately working on. And to talk about Cameroon, we have got a privacy issue that has not been really cleared, really expressed or fixed until now. In the beginning of the pandemic, the government realized that the share of fake news, the wave of fake news in the online, and summoned the director of the National Agency of Telecommunications to arrest or to share the plan, the strategy used to arrest or to identify the perpetrators of those fake news or disinformation. That was that was by April. And in return, the director said, there is a law that is talking about the cybercrime and cybersecurity law that that condemns the sharing of misinformation online. And he displays the article, he cited the article 78 of that law that really describes the sanctions of those sharing misinformation. What arises on that is that the sanctions are very high, even if people really share misinformation. Sanctions are very high. That is what can lead to self-censorship. And on the other part, the Ministry of Telecommunications cited the same law that is to be used in case of misinformation, and the same law was cited for people. For people, it was cited to be used for people using. Let me check a little bit. Okay, it was cited by the Ministry of Health to be used for people getting, for people hiding from being detected for the COVID-19. That is the same law that is being used to prosecute people. But so far, there has not been a case of a person that have been prosecuted under the law. But what we know is that people have been self-censored. They have been said that there has been self-censorship as people fear to be prosecuted. That's the first issue. The same issues is that the other issue is that data has been collected since the beginning of the pandemic. Data has been collected from travelers, from those coming in Cameroon through the treaty strategy of the Ministry of Health. He said he's using the tracking, testing, treat strategy. That means people are tracked, and cases of tracking has been reported. People from relatives of confirmed COVID-19 patients. And those cases have been reported. And so far, there's no statement on how people have been tracked or geolocalized, because other people have been geolocalized and in order to be tested. And there is no evidence that cell phone tracking have been used to track COVID, because there has not been official statement. But all we know is that there have been phone tracking and phone call tracking and geolocalization. No evidence is even made on the application that may have been used to geolocation or phone tracking. And so people are left in that. People are left in the dark concerning that phone geolocalization and phone tracking process. All we know is that data is collected, is being collected, have been collected, and is being processed, but we don't know how it is being processed. Other issue that arise during the pandemic is that people are there have been curfews. There have been ban on social social association. So there have been limitations on people, on the number of people, like on 50 people to be gathered on a place, and as well as school closures and worship places closure, and but not social media platform, but the Ministry of Territorial Administration has banned the accounts that the political party used to collect money in her fight against COVID movement. And the reason was that it's the only president, it's the only the president of the republic that has the power to do that, that has the power to collect money, or to do a charity, to open a charity account during a pandemic. So his activity was banned, and mobile operators, that is MTN and Orange, was summoned to close his account, the account he was using to do his that activity. That was under the law, the law governing associations and governing associations in Cameroon. Then, well, we know that mobile operators, they helped the fight against COVID using some generous offers on data, on calls, on SMS bundles, and even on mobile money transactions. But that is not the real issue here. The issue that arises here is that that's contributed to deepening the digital gaps, because not every people are connected, and since the offer is done only on those who are already connected, and the underconnected are still they are still armed by that generous offers. So just to take it all together, we have got the privacy, data collection, and censorship issues. That was all under one law, the cybersecurity and cybercrime law. And under the law governing associations, we have got the law on, we have got the banning of political party, opposition political party activities. That is what we have got as main issues here in Cameroon. And yeah, that's all for Cameroon. For Chad, we have got the main issue of internet shutdown and WhatsApp disruption. And so far, we have there are still internet shutdown in some countries have been given by government officials. So that is how I can summarize the case of Chad. Chad hasn't. There have been curfews too, and it's still continuing. But there have not been measures There's not been responsive measures to the curfew, as education online, like the government is even trying to do in some countries, and people are still locked down concerning school and public social association. So that's it. Thank you, Victor. I don't know if I gained.
That's very illuminating, because sometimes, you know, we are not able to appreciate what is happening in other African countries. But you raise some very important issues, and I'd like to turn to Jimmy, and afterwards, you know, Melissa, in terms of just looking at speech online, and we have countries that are having elections now that Simone mentioned banning political parties. We have a number of countries in Africa that have scheduled elections. We've had Ethiopia, we had Burundi, Tanzania is coming up, Ghana is coming up, Uganda is coming up. And how do we see the use of this fake news legislation, and what could be their impact on civic participation if elections are coming back and people are needed to engage? And just looking at how these laws have been used, what do you think could be their likely impact on civic participation in democratic processes and accountability for government?
Thank you again, Victor. I think Malawi is one of those countries that we've had elections in the middle of the pandemic. So I'll take it from that background that we voted in 2019, but that election was annulled by Constitutional Court because there were a lot of irregularities and pretty much irregularities that contributed to the outcome of the vote. So the vote was nullified. The court ordered the next election to take place within almost 5 months, 150 days. So in the middle of it, we had the pandemic. Then the government tried to introduce a lockdown. That didn't happen because civil society organization challenged it in court. It violated some of the constitutional issues in the country. Credit to the courts, basically, they did their job and all that. But the bigger problem that we had, almost a dilemma, is that because of the annulled elections, we're in a situation whereby the sitting president had lost legitimacy. So whatever he tried to do to bring in measures about COVID-19, that wasn't actually working because people, basically nobody was listening. He had no legitimacy whatsoever. So the most practical thing to do was to go ahead with elections so that maybe we could have a government that could have some sort of legitimacy, make decisions, and then we move forward. And that's exactly what happened. Meanwhile, in between the two elections, we had about 9 months of almost every day street protests in the country as the court case was going on. The protests basically were organized by civil society organizations and mobilizing ordinary citizens to go on the streets to demand that the chairperson of the electoral body stood down because of her contribution to the irregularities of the elections. She insisted not to go until the case had gone to the appeal court, which upheld the ruling. But what we noticed in between basically was what I may call steady operatives, basically trying to spread misinformation. In most parts, this happened. It's very kind of cynical way of doing it because it involved a lot of basically manipulating in traditional media. What it is that civic space online in Malawi, it's there. Internet penetration is still very low. It's under 14%, just under 14%. But the very few people that are online can be very vocal. And so what had happened as a result is that most people really trust more in still traditional media to give them credible information rather than random websites online. So I think the idea was to basically to manipulate, if I can say, or change headlines. So news headlines will come up. Traditionally, news organizations in Malawi post their front and back pages online as a way of promoting what stories are in the papers today, for example. So these headlines would be changed. For instance, if there is a ruling from court to say demonstrations are on today, maybe somebody trying to take an injunction, you're gonna find pages that are on Facebook, on WhatsApp, and on Twitter to a lesser extent, saying demonstrations have been cancelled. So clearly, the idea to misinform was there. But also what we learned around the same period is that through a report by Southern African Litigation Center, is that in the eve of the 2019 elections, the government tried to shut down the internet, apparently, but it took advice from its lawyers that internet is negligible in Malawi. That's their thinking. Internet is negligible in Malawi, but you'd rather deal with traditional media. So what they did, they banned live radio broadcasting, and they banned all the phone-in programs on radio. So basically, what they were trying to do that all the content that comes off radio basically couldn't be live, so they need a period maybe to edit whatever that could come out and whatnot. So that pointed also to the thinking of the government about internet and perhaps online civic space. But having said that, and I think this is what is emerging also in other countries. I think I have to say that if Malawi government were interested in shutting down the internet, unfortunately, they could easily do so and legally, because we have, for example, Article 24, I think E and F, which talks about government being given power to limit online communication for public interest and public order and national security or something like that. All those vague sort of clauses that can easily be used basically to limit what people discussing. So from Malawian perspective, I think we've had a very unique situation in relations with elections. Meanwhile, the new administration hasn't really gone much about shutting down civic spaces and whatnot. In fact, if anything to the contrary has happened, because of COVID-19, we've had civil society organizations as well as ordinary organizations demanding that price of the internet go down, the government invest in ICT infrastructures, giving examples of COVID-19, that this is a period where people have to have information about what is happening, and yet information is, for majority of people, is only limited to periodic radio programs and whatnot, while the government at the same time is having is undertaking all these efforts, posting daily or maybe hourly updates on their Facebook pages, on government websites, when majority of people don't have access to these spaces. So government has responded somehow positively to that. But I think the key takeaway is what is happening in other countries, like whereby laws have been passed basically to limit online discussions, when at the same time we're talking about having to provide information about COVID-19. So basically what we've learned over this period is that in most cases we have to be worried about intentions of the government in most cases. It's fine when it suits their interest. Other time in Malawi, the government is enjoying its popularity. So it might look all good and nice, but that shouldn't stop us, for example, to look at the fact that if the government wanted to shut the internet, they could do that, and legally so. But also, we have to be worried, for example, lessons that we are learning from, for example, Zimbabwe. In South Africa, registration about, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and South Africa, somebody was talking about legislation about fake news. All these are problematic issues, because unnecessarily it narrows down the available spectrum for freedom of expression, because and what considered fake news in most cases it's not really news. It could create maybe fake information and whatnot. If people are not allowed to say things in fearing that maybe might be construed as fake news, then what we're doing basically, we're taking away that vital space where people could express themselves freely. People should be able to say things. And the problem is, as I was saying, that, for example, in South Africa, I know that there have been laws that have been passed and maybe temporarily for now because they want to deal with the pandemic? At what point, where is the cutting point whereby we say, if this happened and therefore we are reverting to the previous laws? I think this is my main worry, what I'm looking at, that the status quo at the moment could become permanent after the pandemic if we're not careful. And we need to be really guarding against that, especially legal means of restricting access to information has been really problematic, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Those are very, very interesting perspectives in terms of what generally is happening, because that dynamic of, utilizing the law to implement, shutdowns and regulate fake news is actually a growing problem. I've seen a question from in the Q&A section from Omeri A saying that, is there any country in the continent that is likely to roll back on digital surveillance measures introduced during the pandemic? So we can mull about that, and then I'll want to hear your responses on that. For those who have questions, please use the chat section, the Q&A section, the bottom of the screen, and ask your questions. I'd like to turn to Melissa and then come back to Morisola. Melissa, you work on this, civic tech and civic space issues. You've heard what Jimmy has said in terms of how governments are using. Is there any technology? What was the experience in South Africa in terms of how people were engaging online, and in terms of the space, was it shrinking? Was it increasing? And are there any technologies or applications that have been developed to enhance civic participation from your work?
Yeah, there is quite a few platforms that have been, there's been quite a few trends. Let me start there. There is existing platforms that have been turned into platforms for COVID, to respond to COVID, to assist the government and to assist communities. And there's been also other platforms that have been created to specifically deal with COVID. One example is the one I mentioned earlier, GovChat, and they've got quite a bit of civic responses, because they do quite a bit of the pre-screening, access to information, providing access to information, municipality services, and the government, the government grants can now be applied for through that platform as well. So they've been working closely with the government to actually provide citizens with access to information and all the other offerings they can through WhatsApp. So their platform is basically built on WhatsApp. They didn't build a third-party platform, because those are difficult for people to download because of data and access to smartphones and other infrastructure issues. So what they've done is they've built the whole platform on WhatsApp and Messenger. So if anyone has access to those, they can actually access GovChat to access all the services they need. And the other one that I can think of the top of my head is Lockdown Boza, which is really just an app or a website. Well, both. It's actually an app and a website. It had over 1 million downloads in the first 2 weeks or so. What it basically does is it provides citizens with access to information about all the lockdown rules. And it breaks it down by province and by area and by issue that concerns people. For example, curfew rules and times and sales of alcohol and so forth. So everything that's been happening under lockdown in the country, you can find it in simpler terms that citizens can actually understand on this app. And I think Amandla.mobi, which is a campaigning, petitioning platform, I guess, more campaigning, they've also been doing quite a bit of work. I think at the beginning of the lockdown, they were fighting for campaigning for internet service providers, or your MTNs, Vodacom, to actually lessen the cost of data so that people can still have access to information to social media, so they have access to the information they need during this pandemic. So that's one of those things that have come out of this, that a lot of people have been campaigning for the data cost to go down, which has been something that's been happening for quite a long time in this country, because we have quite high data costs, and that actually increases the number of people that does not have access to information, because we are leaving out a big chunk of the population on giving them the access, the information they need. Which other one? There's quite a bit. I guess my thinking is there's more outside South Africa as well. For example, in Nigeria, there's a budget that's focusing on giving people access to the information about all the funding or all the grants they've been getting. So they're listing all the grants or funding that the government is getting to actually show accountability and transparency about where the money is coming from and where the money is being used to combat corruption in that country. And there's also the same thing happening in Kenya. I think it's called Action for Transparency. They're doing similar work. So there's quite a bit of civic tech organizations that are either co-opting their existing platform to fight corruption, to give citizens access to information, or even to fight fake news, which is also another thing. But when it comes to fighting fake news, then there's this issue when it comes to fake news. What defines fake news? It's come out, especially in this report, that governments are just giving broad definitions of what fake news is. So who is defining fake news, and is fake news clear cut? Because if we don't actually define fake news as a community, and who has the right to actually say what is fake news? What is the line between fake news and freedom of expression? Who's responsible for defining this? Is it just the government? Is it civil society? Is it the citizens? That's something that we as a society actually need to sit down and figure out, because at the moment, especially when you read the research, I'm encouraging everyone to read the research, because it's quite an amazing piece of work. We need to define this, because the governments are actually using broad definitions to do as they want, as they see fit, especially during COVID. It's a good thing that reports like these exist, so they can actually document that. So yeah, as I was saying, there's quite a bit of platforms that are actually doing this type of work. Even existing media houses, for example, Africa Check is also they've built a platform just to fight fake news about COVID. So let me think. And there's also platforms in Uganda, for example, Woodnet is also co-opting existing platforms to provide information about COVID to rural area women, because they cannot find the information easily. So there's quite an array of platforms that exist that are actually trying to help governments and citizens and communities in fighting for COVID. But it doesn't always mean they're successful, because like I said earlier, the uptake and the lack of awareness and the data cost is quite high when it comes to civic tech. And that's one of those issues that as a civic tech space, we need to be combating. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for that expounding on the various technologies that are actually being used around this COVID season. I think it's very important for civil society organizations to organize and raise a very important question of who should define fake news. Morisola, coming to you worked on freedom of information and freedom of expression. Who do you think should define fake news, and what are those challenges you see with respect to freedom of information based on your work?
Okay, first of all, thank you very much, Victor. Who to define fake news? I think the problem is that when these policymakers are actually in the process of passing a law, a bill into a law, most often than not, they don't actually communicate with stakeholders in their work. They just want to just quickly pass it, and they always look at it as what is in their best interest. What is in their best interest as policymakers, and not generally what is in the best interest of citizens. Do you understand? So I think for the issue of fake news, it's supposed to be a definition that should be by stakeholders involved. Every stakeholder has to come on board and clearly define what it is. And in that, it gives a clear meaning to it. It gives a clear purpose to fake news, disinformation, misinformation, and all. And I think that even when these policymakers actually call for public hearing, as so to speak, they mostly just ignore things that don't correlate with their ideas, and things that don't align with their own purpose, and they just pass it however they like. Sometimes they just pass these bills as quickly as possible. I think, for instance, in Nigeria now, we have 2 bills that are currently in the National Assembly, and civil society organizations have been advocating against. One of them is the Internet Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulation, where it was saying that speech, that even ill feeling is a crime. So things like that. And once you just have the feeling that probably you don't like somebody, or somebody's just that feeling, which is not in line with international standards. And I think that should actually be taken out from that piece of legislation. In short, that legislation is actually
Marisola,
problematic.
could you just repeat your last sentence? We didn't catch it.
Okay, I was talking about, for instance, the bills pending at the National Assembly in Nigeria. We have 2 bills pending. One is the anti-social media bill. That's the Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulation bill, that even criminalizes ill feeling. So can that now be classified as fake news, disinformation, misinformation? Not at all. So the bill itself has problematic issues, that it has things that are problematic. So when it comes to the issue of fake news, I think it's something that all stakeholders should sit down and just draft a bill or something from bottoms up, and they know that, okay, it comes with the involvement of stakeholders, and it makes more sense, and it drives more purpose to the documents or the bill policy, whichever it may be. Then, as to the issue of access to information, Nigeria currently has an access to information law, which is the Freedom of Information Act. But the problem we see is implementation, particularly in this period of COVID. Okay, sorry, can you hear me now?
I don't know, maybe you could disable your video a bit to help with the connection.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the problem we see with the access to information, particularly in this time, in this COVID-19, the implementation of the law. We have had a number of requests made to institution, and even when we get responses, we get outrageous responses to our request, and we see the unwillingness for these institutions to respond that we have a law in place. And although, in Nigeria, for instance, the government has been a bit proactive in the sense that in terms of numbers, in terms of progress of COVID-19, they've actually been coming out every day to give reports like, okay, these are the numbers, contact tracing, we traced to some people, and we found a number of new COVID-19 cases and the likes. But there's still a lack in terms of transparency. Like Melissa mentioned that there have been reports in terms of the amount the government has received, what they've received, and how they've been doing it, but there is still a huge gap in that sense. And when you even make requests to these government agencies, they don't answer. Many of them don't respond, and those that even respond give reasons that are unimaginable. Some will tell you that they've reported and they don't have the information anymore because they've reported it to the appropriate institutions. Those are the kind of things we get. And even when we go to court and litigate, and you see them raising objections here and there from various means, and you'll be like, why didn't you just respond? Why are you coming now in court to just start raising the objections to it? And they prefer just spending the money, spending the time in court than to actually respond to the information. Thank you.
Interesting. You raise the question of courts. Just hold on. Want to find out, like, how then can civil society push back against this resistance by governments, and have there been any successes in terms of just getting them to do what they are supposed to do and provide the information?
I think, yeah, there have been a number of success. We've had a number of cases where courts have ruled that information should be provided. And although because of the litigation system is a very slow system and very painstaking process, you have to go all the way. We have a number of cases stay 2 years. So we've had a number cases that were filed currently have not been assigned, because even despite the fact that there was a lockdown during the period when the pandemic first hit and when it was really, really high, courts still went on vacation when it was time to go for the annual vacation. So no, you just file your cases, and many of them have not even been assigned. So that's a major problem. But we still have to wait, and we still have to go through the court process, because that is our only place of remedy when it comes to access to information in Nigeria. That's our only remedy, just the court system. And we'll still obviously go there, but just that our cases might take a long time, probably 2 years, some 3 years, but we still have to go through the process.
Thank you. We'll come back to you for closing round. Perhaps if there are any questions from the audience, you can type them in the Q&A box at the bottom. We so far have one question. Perhaps we can go quickly, and all of you can tell me whether there's any country that is likely to roll back on digital surveillance. Simon, you've had quite a number of internet shutdowns in West Africa, Cameroon, and do you think it will end?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the end of your question. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I don't know what's going on.
We can hear you. I think Victor is frozen.
That's right. I can also hear you, Smony. I think it's Victor.
Yeah, he seems not to be online.
Maybe you can just go ahead and discuss as he asks, instead of just can proceed from there.
Yeah, the point is just that I didn't get the end of his question. I got the beginning asking for cases of internet shutdown in West Africa, but I didn't really know how he specified the question. Victor, are you with us?
About that, we lost power a bit. Yes,
okay. I was saying I didn't get the end of your question.
Got disconnected. Yes, I was asking Simone whether, looking at the question at the section below, whether you think that governments will roll back on this surveillance.
How they're going to roll back the surveillance?
Whether they're going to roll back.
Whether they're going to roll back? No, because I don't think they're going to roll it back because now they are not even recognizing that they have they are doing real surveillance. When they state that they can use it, they don't mention under which circumstances, like how what are the ways they are using to process surveillance. So it works with surveillance and internet shutdowns. When they apply internet disruptions, it's not always explained the reason why they are doing it, neither how they are doing it. So as long as they are not real reasons, or they are not clear reasons or clear way to process it, they are likely to keep it on. So to keep that that surveillance on, to keep the ban on and the surveillance. So we need to act or to react in order to make sure that we are not they are not going to continue with.
And now that you mentioned that we need to react, what do you think then should actors do to prevent this from going on? What are some of those things that need to be done from your perspective?
In actors, as you mentioned, in actors, I will include even the civil society, the academics, and even only we can have a progressive, a positive partnership with mobile operators, since they are all they are working with closely with the governments. If only they can publish the way how they apply their surveillance, the way how they apply surveillance, people may know how to prevent, eventually how to prevent it. And sometimes surveillance, when applied on somebody, affects the whole part, the whole region of the country, or the whole country. When somebody will commit, let's say, fake news or misinformation online, the ban would be applied on everybody. So if there isn't, though, if we know the way how they do it, maybe we can prevent being a victim of others' faults or errors. So what I think next is that continuing advocacy is the key to get out of it. If we remain silent, nothing is going to be done. We are talking, but nothing is being done. So all what we can do is keep talking and intensifying the advocacy, intensifying the fight, intensifying the strategy, and even bringing more people on board to make it more consistent. So let's go through advocacy. Let's ask the mobile operator to publish how they do it. Let's ask the government to publish the reason, to communicate, to publish the reason why they do it, and maybe we will get good results in the long time or the middle time. So the only hope resides on advocacy and our right of information, our right to information. We need to know the reason why they are banning those the platforms, the reason why they are surveilling, and how they are surveilling.
Thank you very much, Simone. That's very interesting perspectives. Melissa, you work with all these technologies. How can we utilize all this civic tech to address all these problems? Is there a magic bullet that will reset digital rights moving forward?
We would all like a bullet, a magic bullet, wouldn't we? But I don't think so, especially when it's issues that concern governments and citizens. Those in power will always find a loophole to get away with things. I guess that's why a lot of civic tech tries to combat corruption and giving as much information to citizens as possible. But I think I'm just gonna agree with Simone here. We need a lot of the advocacy and the transparency that comes with it, and pushing for the government to be transparent and to account for why they've done or they've put up a new law and a new regulation. It's one of those ways we can keep up with the government so that they're not silently passing laws that affect us on our daily lives without our input as citizens. So that's, yeah, I agree with Simone there. And we could be using civic tech platforms to actually share these new laws and these new regulations. They can, if government wanted to, government could actually use civic tech platforms to share these new regulations they put together. That's why these platforms are there, and a lot of people could actually then end up using the civic tech. That means the government doesn't actually end up having to create new smart tech to reach citizens. They could just use pre-existing platforms. And I think there's a question here about if government is using other mediums. Yeah, then if civic tech is just one of those mediums that government can use, but so is radio. But I think another thing that the South African government has done is they've also been using zero-rated platforms. I think their SA coronavirus platform is zero-rated, and some other education platforms are actually zero-rated, so that people can actually still access information and students can still learn during the COVID pandemic and find information that they need. So that's one approach as well, to find ways that to give citizens information without the cost of high data every month that citizens can barely afford. For example, in South Africa, citizens get about 300 per month, those that need government assistance. And that's about what, $20? So it's not much. So with that, they can't even afford a single gig of data. So zero-rated platforms are actually a helpful approach to combat this problem. Thank you.
Yes, Melissa, and just to hold you back still, you know, there are this category. I mean, you've mentioned so many applications, but one of the things that is critical is that not everybody has access to, you know, fast or even reliable or even actually have internet. We also heard from Jimmy saying that, you know, in Malawi, less than 20% have access to internet. So how do you bridge the gap? You know, we have all these fantastic applications, but if 80% of the guys are offline, then how do we bridge the gap?
Wow, that's a big question. And I can't say I have the perfect answer for it, but being actually proactive as government, as providers of internet access, what do you call them? The MTNs, the telecoms of the world, those actually have to want to help society get access to information and get access to the internet. So we can campaign all we want, but if those companies don't actually want to help improve society and give access to others, there's not much we can do, especially when it comes to governments that have laws to actually make the companies give access and they don't actually implement the laws. I think that's one of the issues that keep coming up with the Data Must Fall campaign in South Africa, that there's the laws and there's no implementation, and there's no one holding the companies accountable. If we can't hold the companies accountable, well, if the government is not holding the companies accountable, then what power do the citizens hold? because we're giving power to the government to make sure that we get access to internet and affordable data. And if they're not helping us get to that, then all we can do is campaign and advocate for as long as we want. But I do think the power lies with the government as well, that they should act on the laws that they're putting together. Implementation is an important step towards making sure that people get online. And another point there is, what do you call it? Infrastructure. We need the proper infrastructure. That's also another big issue in Africa. We don't have all the perfect infrastructure to get everyone online. So that's another issue that civil society and governments need to start looking into.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. I'll come to Marisol and then Jimmy. Marisol, from where you sit with all these challenges that is there, you know, when courts have closed when we need them, is there a way we can stop the laws from coming into force before we have to go to court to stop them from being implemented?
Despite the fact that majority of the courts go on vacation at the point of time or close, they are also, the courts also put in place like emergency courtrooms. So when they need to be, when there's need for a case to be held speedily, like in terms of emergency or when there's an urgency, then a court has to sit. That's the rule, yeah. But the thing is that even in these laws, I think we don't need to wait for a court to make pronouncements. We can start with advocacy. The advocacy work can never be overflowed. We can start with advocacy at the National Assembly. The National Assembly can actually reenact these laws. So they can change it, despite the fact that, yeah, they made it. If we advocate and we speak out enough, speak in one voice and let it get to them, then they can sit back and say, okay, now we need to reenact the law. We need to change a particular place. We need to take out the entire thing and replace it. So we need not to just wait for court, because court processes are expensive and they are very, very long. You have a lot of law jargon as you go on, the objections, the reply here and there. So it takes a lot of time. But if we can try our hands on advocacy, then I think some of these policies or laws, regulations can also change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marisol. And just one last thing, what else do you think needs to be done if you were to reset? What would be the magic button that we can press and resolve all these issues, in your opinion?
Wow, it's a magic button.
Victor, I wish there was a magic button. I wish I would just rather just go for that and just press it and everything just is served. There's no magic button anywhere. For the surveillance issues, we're seeing a lot of the issues that are coming up. Freedom of expression violations, digital rights violations. Our only options, like I said earlier, will just have to be advocacy when we need to advocate for either a bill not to be passed, a law to be repealed and reenacted, or a policy to be changed and everything, or we go to court. These are the things that I see. I don't know if there's any other thing that we can do, and we just have to keep doing that. Even till now, we still do that, like go to court, let's hear what the court has to say about it. I think that's just it, but I wish there was a magic button. I would have just pressed that a long time ago. Thank you.
Interesting. Melissa, I see you have a point you were saying.
Oh, yeah. I was just adding on to my last point that another way to get more people online is to use USSD, which doesn't really need the use of smartphones or data. You can just press, let's say, *100 hash, and then you get access to quite a few. You can get access to information to the internet. and all you need is a basic phone and a cell phone tower. So if we have cell phone towers, even in the rural areas, then we can have more people online. It doesn't need to be fancy technology, which I think is a strong point that I feel very strongly about, because everyone always thinks that to get online and to advance technologically in Africa, we must get, you know, smart cities, smart tech. No, sometimes you just need the most basic tool that is there that people already have. That's the way you reach people. Don't create new things when there's already pre-existing tech that people have access to. Yeah.
Very interesting. And perhaps that can work very well in Malawi, where we have very few people online. Jimmy, you know, you have a magic wand, you have a magic button. What would you press? And also, as you make your remarks, there's this whole, I wouldn't call it a conflict, but you know, tension between mainstream media and social media. And how can you leverage? Because now we've seen a number of journalists being attacked. We've seen these fake news laws affecting both bloggers and journalists and generally online activists. So how do we reset so that we can enjoy freedom of expression, both by journalists and everybody who's online?
Wow, that's a big question there. But I think I'll start from what the list have said. In general, I agree with a lot of sentiments here regarding especially the rollback, where do we stop and all that. I think we also need to think about this from the perspective of the pandemic itself. I don't think nobody has really said the coronavirus is going to go away. We may just find maybe means of living with it. In which case, our situation becomes very tricky, because so long as the virus is there, I don't see governments moving back or maybe stopping any of this, even though we may find the means of living with the virus. I think that is a critical point to think about, because most of the laws of temporary measures that have come up, they are close-ended. I mean, there are no definite period whereby we're going to stop this, or maybe this is a condition in which we can, you know, roll back. And the fear really is that the situation that we have created now could really become part of our lives. It could become permanent. I think we really need to be careful about that. So it's up to us, basically, activists, civil society organizations, to start demanding that, okay, in some cases, maybe legally, there may be temporary measures that have been put in place, but we need to have these with sort of clear demarcation. At what point would we then go back? I think this is the question that we need to start asking, but I haven't seen any country that I can confidently say we are going to go back to normal ways of doing things. Our governments are good at learning from situations, and I think they have learned from this. So we have our job cut out here. Basically, we need to demand better things. Another issue is about the question you're talking about, the conflict between social media and traditional media. I think this is a tricky one, because by and large, I'm not sure in other places around the world, but I can guarantee you in most countries in Africa, including Malawi, we also have the so-called traditional media. They are also heavily involved on online platforms. So when you talk about social media, we need to think about it as a platform that is being used by ordinary citizens as well as traditional media. I think what traditional media can do in most cases is just really to stick to what journalism is. I don't think these platforms should really change the tenets of what journalism is. You know, report facts, verify information. You know, you better let collect information, credible information, rather than you know, break news that is not correct. So in most cases, I think where the tension is that maybe traditional media, tend to see social media as their competitor, but I don't think there's competition between the two, because what traditional media is, it should be, there are a lot of people who create information online who don't have any journalism training, people who don't have any sort of ethical standards in their writings. So I would say traditional media should remain traditional media and report news as it is. Also, maybe what can be done, because this is another aspect of the world in which we live in today. If, say, for example, I spent half a day, maybe even less than that, paying attention to what is happening on social media today in Malawi, the chances are I can guess tomorrow's headlines. Because most of what is being discussed online, they end up with exactly the same stuff in the news. So maybe news organizations, especially the newspapers, radio, television can maybe compete in terms of pace, but newspapers can't. So perhaps we need to get to a point of thinking, how best can we create our content? How best can we report the same information that everybody has been discussing on social media? What value can we add? I think that way things can work. I mean, you can't just be business as usual. You need to know that information ecosystem has changed, and you need to move. We need to move with it. But I don't think traditional media is really a competitor. I mean, social media is really a competitor of traditional media. Unless traditional media, let it be. That's one thing. The other thing is that what I've noticed also is that there's been good initiative by several organizations coming up with fact-checking websites and whatnot. The problem in most parts that I've noticed is that the limitations of those websites, again, is a question of access. That most of these fact-checking websites can only really be accessible by people who also have access to the internet. But I'll give you an example. In Malawi, this issue of using bundled internet can be problematic. A lot of people who will tell you they use internet, for example, they use Facebook, maybe WhatsApp only. These are the bundles that they can afford. So if I send a link to a particular group about a certain story we need to discuss, the chances are people are not going to open that link because they don't take them outside of their bundle that they have subscribed for WhatsApp, for example. The best that I can do is to take screenshots. People can read those screenshots within their own platform. Now, suppose that information is fake. These guys have no means of verifying whether it's fake or not. And these are limitations that we have, and these are real issues. So I think we can emphasize enough access is very important. One way of combating misinformation is not crossing the civic space. It's to open up so people may have options. People may have means to verify information by themselves. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. That's a very, I mean, I couldn't have put it any better. I just want to thank each one for participating in this, session. We have had Jimmy Kanja from Malawi University. We've had Morisola Alaba from Media Rights Agenda in Nigeria. Melissa Zisengwe from the WITS Governance School in South Africa, and Simone Tusi from Cameroon, but also from here at CIPESA. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to read more about this, you can find this information in the State of Internet Freedom in Africa report, which is launching today. It's going to be available on the CIPESA website. You can just check the CIPESA website and we'll have all the information. The report this year covers the issues relating to digital rights during the COVID-19 season that have affected freedom of expression, access to information, privacy, and freedom of assembly and association. We are very happy to have collaborated with very many people across the continent to highlight some of these emerging issues. And, it is important to continue advocating and also documenting some of these practices that are happening across the continent, because it is the only way we can learn what is happening and document for future generations, but also to allow us to press that reset button, or if not, to find it. So I also want to thank the audience for very active participation. Once again, thank you all on behalf of CIPESA. It's been a fantastic session with all our panelists, and thank you very much, and keep on tweeting through the hashtag FIFAAfrica20 and engaging in the sessions that are going to come. On behalf of myself as the moderator and the panelists, thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.